it's been so successful and it's been around so long. While it started out as a tabletop miniature game, there's well over 100 novels that have been published and dozens of computer games that have been published, and comics and toys and plushies and like just everything under the sun can be found here. For those that are like, how can it be this big and I've never heard of it? I was just listening to a video that I have found from a fan who called it the greatest science fiction universe you've never heard of.
Hi there, my name is George, and welcome to the Crowdfunding Academy podcast. I used to work at Kickstarter, and currently I help creators run successful campaigns with my companies YG and Fantastic Funding. On this podcast, you'll hear from creators and my team how they consistently launch record-breaking campaigns so you can do the same. Our guest today is Randall Bills. He is the managing developer at Catalyst Game Labs. They are currently live on Kickstarter, inching closer to $5 million raised with their project BattleTech and Mercenaries. Randall is a celebrated game designer who works primarily on role-playing games and is the author of countless, and I mean countless, BattleTech books. Welcome, Randall. Before we dive into your $1 million campaign, can you give us a quick introduction on yourself and your background?
Well, I've been doing this a long time. Like most kids in the 80s that were geeks, we ran into a anime called Robotech early on, which was based on a whole series of Macross and Super Dimensional Fortress, amazing anime out of Japan. And I'm 14 or 15 when I first discovered that, could not get enough of it, recorded it on the VCR, rewatched it all the time. I had already been playing D&D for a couple years and happened to see the cover. The first cover I saw was Fox's Teeth, which is a scenario pack. And then I went to another game store and actually saw the original BattleTech second edition box set. Being 15 at the time, I had to, took a while to decide if I was going to spend all my paper money on buying that box set. And I did. And of course, just fell in love with it instantly. And it's still very much pinch me moments where I think that I've been engaged in loving this universe for nearly 40 years and I still love it and I still get to be a part of it. And then for getting in the industry, this is that moment where I get to give a wonderful shout out to Brian Neistel again. Brian Neistel was the BattleTech line developer at Facet Corporation, which was the creator and publisher of the game. And he had come out from Chicago to a local game convention called Hexacon in Arizona, where I was living. And I had made a variant of the Succession Wars board game, which was a kind of a grand strategy board game set in the BattleTech universe. And I jokingly asked, of course, I'm totally geeking out because here's the line developer of this game that I've been loving for 10 years. And I jokingly asked, hey, do you want to play my game? And he said, yes, for some weird reason. And so he stayed up all night long playing this game with us at this convention. And it was terrible, right? Like it's just a terrible, I still have it somewhere buried because I have to keep it because it's the very first thing I did. But somehow he saw something in there that then, the next year when they were looking for somebody to bring in as an assistant to the various game designers, the Shadowrun game designer, Earthdawn game designer, and then BattleTech game designer, he said, hey, we should give Randall a chance. And then another great moment of shout out to my wife, because then suddenly I'm 24 and about to move, almost 2,000 miles away from family and friends to a city I'd never been in, and moving from Arizona to Chicago in January, was quite the shock. And so for almost a moment, I was kind of like, do I really want to do this? And Tara was basically, you have to do this, right? Like this is all you've ever wanted. And so I took the leap and then, I've just kind of followed BattleTech through all the various companies that it's been at because I've loved it to death and I just love the community and love being a part of it.
So you have never not been a game designer.
I've been for a very long time. Like I said, I did the game design. Well, I was writing fan fiction stuff when I was in high school. I started tinkering with game design when I was in high school. And then just before I turned 25 is when I got hired into the tabletop industry. had an amazing ability to work with just so many fantastic people, because designing a game is never all by yourself, right? It's a collaborative effort. You may start the ball rolling, but to get it finalized and out the door is a huge team of wonderfully creative people. And it's one of the things I love most about this industry and most about what I get to do is working with just passionate, wonderfully creative people to, as I like to say, make crap up and put it out there and find an audience for it. And you're just so grateful and thankful when you find an audience for this thing that you just made up.
And what an audience you found with BattleTech and your last two Kickstarters, actually. For those unfamiliar with BattleTech, what is the basic premise of this game in this universe?
I like to say that Battletech is kind of the original Game of Thrones. Think giant walking tanks set in a far future science fiction landscape. And it's kind of a fall of the Roman Empire. So several centuries, it's the 31st century now, but several centuries before, there was this grand star league that unified all of humanity, and then it collapsed into war. And so then you have these succession war states, this great noble lineage star empires that then fight each other to hopefully try and reestablish that star league again. And so it's been so successful and it's been around so long that it's, while it started out as a tabletop miniature game, there's well over 100 novels that have been published and dozens of computer games that have been published and comics and toys and plushies and like just everything under the sun can be found here. I was actually just, for those that are like, how can it be this big and I've never heard of it, right? I was just listening to a video that I have found from a fan um, who called it the greatest science fiction universe you've never heard of. And
I
so,
just saw that video on
right,
YouTube, right?
right,
That,
and the first couple of minutes are so funny. Like
yeah.
he kind of captures a Galaxy Quest vibe where he's totally poking fun at it, but in a way that we all poke fun at the thing that we love and still, so yeah, big shout out to whoever put that together and anyone that's thinking about it, just type that in, the greatest science fiction universe you've never heard of. And he does a fabulous couple of minutes before he then goes into the computer game side of it, which again, it's all interconnected, right? You read a novel, you play the computer game, you play the board game. They're all just aspects of experiencing what it's like to be in this universe.
And this universe is currently owned by Catalyst Game Labs. So, like, how does this work? Because you knew this game when you were a teenager. You're currently the managing developer on this game. So, how does that whole structure work?
It's a lot more complicated than that because any property that's been around for a long time and been really successful gets chopped up. It's just the nature of IPs, intellectual properties. So back in the late 90s, so Facet Corporation originally published the BattleTech game in themselves, board game, and it blew up, right? It just became massive. So then they started publishing novels and more product and source books and just fleshed it out into a whole, what we call a lifestyle game. Most board games are not lifestyle games. You play it, you love it, you're done, you put it back on the shelf. A lifestyle game is where you can experience it in a lot of different ways. And you're like, as you can see right now, I'm wearing a Clan Wolf t-shirt. So like Star Wars is a lifestyle IP, right? If you love Star Wars, you love Star Wars. You love watching it. You love reading it. You play the computer games. You wear the stuff. And so that's what it was turning into. And then uh, they did the virtual reality pods. So the very first internet connected entertainment of being able to sit inside something and play a game was done by BattleTech. It was virtual world entertainment. That was in the early 90s. And then that blossomed up to a point that they did Facet Interactive. So Facet created a computer game division that's to publish games. And then, as happens, Microsoft came along and bought the computer game side of it. Any electronic game for the BattleTech universe is owned by Microsoft and has been for 20 plus years. And it's Microsoft, right? So they're never going to give it up. So it's always over there. So when you see all the computer games that have happened in the last 20 years, that's always been either Microsoft directly or is a license from Microsoft. Then in 2001, Facet Corporation closed its doors, as many game companies do. Its time had come. A new company came along called WizKids, created by the same Jordan Weisman who had created FASA and BattleTech. And they took on the license for BattleTech and they started doing BattleTech stuff as well. And then in the late 2000s, they were then bought by Topps, literally Topps, the baseball company, right? So Catalyst came along in 2007, and that's a whole interesting story unto itself about how Catalyst was formed. Catalyst arrived on the scene in 2007, made up of a lot of the people who, like me, who'd been working on it for decades, right? Like it came about that it was time to form a new company to be able to start publishing this game we love. So then we licensed the rights from Topps. So Catalyst does not own BattleTech.
Okay.
We just licensed the rights to produce the board game, novels, fiction, source books, and so on. And then Topps was just recently purchased last year by Fanatics, which is, a multi-billion-dollar sports paraphernalia company.
Yeah.
And so technically now we are a licensor or we are a licensee of Fanatics. And then the movie rights and the film rights are all off at a totally other company called Tornante. So it's a big long mess, right? Like we could still talk about the nuances of it for several hours, just that part.
So it switches ownership or it gets split off. But you're kind of the consistency throughout this whole process, right?
So the game came out in 85, the BattleTech Second Edition box that was published in 85. And for those listening for the BattleTech that want me to say it, it actually was published as Battle Droids in 1984. And Lucas immediately sent a cease and desist over the use of the words droid because he owns it. And so they had to change that. So then it became BattleTech in 85. So I've been playing since the end of 1986 as a fan. And then in 1996, I was hired to work on it. And then, yeah, I'm probably the single strongest through thread of it all. Again, there's many authors, freelance authors that have been working on it almost as long, if not longer than I have in a freelance capacity. But being on the inside and then traveling from company to company, I have been that person that has been able to keep that momentum going, the institutional knowledge, if you will.
Yeah. The steward of the universe.
Yeah.
So then moving into this latest Kickstarter campaign, um, first of all, why did you decide to do a Kickstarter? You've done one previously, you did super well, also about 2.5 million, I believe. Why do you, with such a legacy, still decide to do a Kickstarter?
The adventure gaming industry, the tabletop games industry, one of its biggest problems is marketing and marketing penetration, being able to let people know what it is that you're doing. And that's always been so all the way back at the very beginning from D&D when it was first made in the late 70s, where Gary and his family and friends are literally selling the game out of their trunk, right? All the way up to today, it's still hard to get people to know what it is because we just don't have good channels for marketing. And then add to that, that gaming has actually exploded in popularity over the last 20 years to levels that I still have a hard time wrapping my head around, right? Like I just went to see the D&D movie last weekend that I loved. Great fun time. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself that even 15 years ago, I could not have imagined that I'd be sitting in a theater watching a full on, giant Hollywood blockbuster movie of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So now we then have kind of the flip side of that, which is not only do we still struggle to market, but now there are so many games going to market that it's hard to get past the noise, right? I think last year or maybe it was a year before, there was something like 4,000 board games, not even miniature games, just board games released last year. Now, again, I don't mean that as a bad thing. I see that as a wonderful, fantastic thing, particularly when I can walk out and still find most people on the street that have no idea what it is that we do for fun. That means, we still have such a giant audience that we can go find, but it means finding that audience is really hard. So for us and for a lot of companies that I talk to, the Kickstarter is very rarely about the money. Sometimes it can be, absolutely, but it's almost always about marketing. Hence, right now, me having this interview with you, this would never have happened except you saw a big, giant, successful Kickstarter and you're like, hey, I want to know what's going on there. Right.
Yeah.
So it's about the exposure. And then this comes back to what we were talking earlier, the greatest science fiction universe you've never heard of. We're trying to change that. And
Yes.
Kickstarter is helping us change that, helping get the word out that, hey, this is an amazing universe and you should totally come and check it out.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, one of Kickstarter's unique properties is that it publicly shows how much you're raising, right? If you just have like an online store, no one sees the amount of orders you have. But with Kickstarter, people like myself are looking at this and going, have I missed something really
And,
big
and
in the
that's
world?
success breeds success, right? Like
Yeah.
we were just talking, we've broken into the top 50 Kickstarters of all time right now. Can we get into the top 20? Can we get into the top 15? Could we get into the top 10? And sure, the money is great. Don't get me wrong. But to me, it's about what would that say about this property that we love? How many new eyes for years to come would be finding this game? Because every time they go and search, hey, what's the top 20 Kickstarters, which everyone loves to do, and ours is in there every time, right? So to us, that's the magic that we're trying to find, is to get more eyes and more people sitting at tables, tossing dice or reading one of our books, and Kickstarter's helping us do that.
Amazing. Can you speak a little bit to what your marketing strategy has been for this specific campaign and how it got so big?
It's really complicated. And what I mean by that is it's not big because we did any one specific thing. It's big because of a lot of factors that have played out across several years, some of which we've been hard at work at, others are just pure serendipity, and we're able to tap into that. Any giant IP waxes and wanes, right? It grows big, everybody loves it. It kind of goes down, and only the hardcore guys are staying on, and then it comes back again. It's just the nature of how this goes. And so BattleTech has always been there. It has published some new thing every single year for coming on 40 years. But, 6 or 7 years ago, it absolutely was in the bottom. It was at the trough of how many people were playing and people paying attention to it. And one of the key things that we decided to do was to do new plastic miniatures. BattleTech has had metal miniatures. Most of tabletop miniature play has been metal through almost all of its existence. About 15 years ago, plastic started coming on the scene pretty good. We tried our hand at plastic about 10 years ago and it was terrible. They did not work out very well at all. And so we're like, you know what? Let's try it again, but we're going to do it differently this time. And then the other really key magic thing that we did was to reimagine the battle mechs. So for those that don't know what a battle mech is, battle mechs are the stars. They're, like I said, giant walking tanks, anywhere from, 7 to 16 meters tall. So like 30, 35 feet tall, these giant, cool, gargantuan robots. But instead of being robots, they have a pilot, like Top Gun, for example, running around in it. And that's very much the vibe. It's like, Top Gun meets a knight that gets on his metal steed of a giant robot and goes blow stuff up on an alien world, right?
What
Uh,
did that guy in the YouTube video say about this? He said it's like a cat truck meets a
yes,
transformer.
it was if the Caterpillar company had bought Gundam, which is another style of mech, right? So, and that's very much true, right? It's uh anime, which again I watch plenty of. I love it all. But they're very fast and super agile, and they're almost human-like, even if they're giant. Whereas these are big, lumbering tanks, right? They have a heft and a weight to them that just feels really cool. And then we followed through and actually came out with good quality plastics. And so in 2018, we published the beginner box set and a game of Armored Combat, which were the two newest ways that you would get into the universe. Jordan, who was the original creator of BattleTech, who had founded Fast and founded WizKids, had then gone off to do Harebrained Schemes. They did a wonderful Shadowrun game, which is our cyberpunk meets Lord of the Rings role-playing game that we publish as well. They did Harebrained Schemes BattleTech computer game. They ran an incredibly successful Kickstarter. They released it in 2018, this critically acclaimed, wonderfully received computer game coming out at the exact same time that we were coming out with our brand new plastics and a new way in. And then in 2019 is when we launched the Clan Invasion Kickstarter. And the Clan Invasion Kickstarter, that one was much more about the money, right? So making molds for minis is expensive, really, really expensive.
How expensive?
So a given mold, like one of our BattleTech molds is about $3,500 for one miniature. It's about $3,500.
And you
That's a
have
lot.
how many?
And the Kickstarter, so we were going to do like 15 mechs, and we told the Kickstarter, we're going to do 15 mechs. And if you fund, we're 15 and we're good. Right. But then we allowed them to go, hey, you're going to tell us how many you want to unlock, right? There's hundreds and hundreds of mechs that have been made over 40 years. We will go as far as you guys want us to go. And we eventually had to cut them off because they unlocked almost 100. So 100 times 3,500. And you could quickly understand how monstrously expensive just the mold costs for that were.
Yeah.
But it did exceptionally well. It exploded. It got players coming back in. And so then that leads us up to now, which is part of what has made BattleTech so amazing is it has a persistent dynamic universe, which means that it actually progresses. So the universe changes and progressions. Characters live and they die, and new characters are born and they come along. So the game covers like 1,000 years. And of course, it's been 40 years and we have hundreds of source books and novels. So you can play anywhere you want along that time frame. But at the same time, the game, when it was originally published, started in 3025 in what was called the Succession Wars. A new faction invaded called the Clans. There were like these huge technologically advanced factions that came sweeping in. We then progressed through several eras. Well, 2 years ago, we just wrapped up an era that had been around for quite some time called the Dark Age. And we've just opened up a new era called the Ill Clan era with new fiction, new storylines, new campaigns. So it's also a perfectly good onboarding moment as well, right? While obviously you can dive in and, BattleTech is so deep and wide that you can swim as far and as deep as you want. But you can also just grab, for example, our new Tamar Rising source book and a box set and feel like you're getting in on the ground floor. We have this ourselves with some other board games that we've done. You run a Kickstarter, you get that material out. Awesome. You made it. It's great. And then you try and put it into distribution, actually get it out of retail stores, and nothing happens, right? And there's plenty of games or plenty of companies that make a perfectly good living just doing Kickstarter games. So the question was always, what's going to happen when it gets into the market? And apparently all of that work did amazing because we've sold 4 and 5 times through distribution what we have through the Kickstarter. And as of the start of this year, we had put into the market like around 7 million plastic minis in the last 3 years. So there's just this huge interest. Another thing that we did that was kind of an accident, which is we originally coming out of Gen Con, which is the biggest tabletop gaming convention in the world last August, we had said we're going to be launching this at the end of the year. Well, we weren't able to launch it at the end of the year, right? Like we wanted to get further along in production and all the assets that we needed. And so we weren't able to launch it until just this last March 23rd. But what we did start doing is starting in December, every 2 weeks for 4 months, we released a preview PDF that actually showed you a behind the scenes. Here's one of the old designs. Here's an image of it when it was published in, 1987. And then here's the process that we took it to redesign it all. And then tied that into new fiction that was being released, into new t-shirts that we released. So every 2 weeks for 4 months was this cool big experience of I get to look behind the scenes at this game, at this Kickstarter that's coming. And so by the time we got here, not to diminish the normal backer kit or social media posts and marketing and all those ads that we do, those are absolutely helpful and we've done them. But I think it was far more this other momentum that we had built up of players actually playing our game. And then that 4 months of just every 2 weeks, they got a cool look behind the scenes of what we were doing. That I think is what really went it over the top. And then we did the whole live stream at Adepticon, so that not only could they launch it, but then for almost 40 hours worth across 4 days, I, along with the other biggest people involved, the artists to the authors and the line developers, either we were playing games, which is what this is all about, right? And people could watch us play games, or we would sit and have discussions about fiction or art and answer questions. And so that type of connectivity, that type of giving them access to us, I think was also a huge help in why there was such crazy acceleration right out of the gate.
So a few years ago, you modernized the franchise. You gave it a modern facelift, so to say, and that got people sort of re-excited. Then you're taking people along this journey leading up to this campaign where you're giving them behind the scenes looks into how you guys are thinking about the art and the design, and they're becoming part of the process, that they're already really bought into this campaign before it's even started. And then to top it all off, you have direct access to the main people behind the game, being yourself and your colleagues, live streaming, answering questions. So really, you've drawn people into the process rather than just staying in the shadows and saying, "Ta-da! Here's a new thing. Please buy it."
I completely agree with all of that. One last element I forgot, just because there's so much to talk about. Some other crazy idea that we had, which is we actually put out a call to game stores all over the world to say, we're going to run 8 to 10 launch parties that we will take some 30 models from this Kickstarter and we will get advanced samples in from the printer. And then we're going to mail them to you. And then you're going to be able to run games in your store. You're going to be able to give out these brand new models that have never been seen before. And then during our live stream, we're going to touch base with you so all of your guys can sit there and talk with us. So that was a whole other big emotional connection that we were able to create, and it was like 4 or 5 here in the US, but we had, one in Ireland, one in UK, one in Germany, just really all over the world, because we have this wonderful worldwide community, many of which have been playing this game absolutely every bit as long as I have, and others just finding the game for the first time. And so I think that connection and that availability and that the immediacy of all of that really created something special that I don't believe I've ever really seen done with a Kickstarter launch.
It seems very unique, and I saw the launch parties and the live stream and Twitch, and it feels like such a momentous event, and I'm sure it is to a lot of people who are into this game. But the way you guys set it up, it feels like bigger than Steve Jobs launching the iPod. Like
Well,
it's literally like,
well, that's what we're trying to do. Like, anyone who loves a thing loves when that thing is doing well, right?
yeah,
It's the nature of what we love. And, when you love a band and the band starts doing really good and suddenly everyone starts in, not only you're like, hey, I was there before, it was cool, but then you're like, but now they're cool and that's awesome.
yeah.
And so if you've loved BattleTech for all this time, seeing it back at the top of its game, seeing it where people are like almost running towards it to want to be a part of it and play it. That's just such an amazing feeling. And for the vast majority of the community, it's open arms, right? Like, please come in. Anyone come in. This game has something for everybody. You can experience it and enjoy it any which way you want.
On the practical side of this, for example, when you say you're sending out PDFs and previews, do you have an email marketing strategy or a system? Are you collecting people's emails? I can imagine a lot of people been playing this since before email. So,
Yeah, well, one, we've kind of trained our community to know, come to our store every Friday, and there's likely going to be something releasing, even if it's just a small PDF. We did work with BackerKit to put up a pre-launch page
mhm,
back in January that got nearly 20,000 people to sign up for that. So
wow,
that was another way. And then, we've been a company that's been around for, 15 years now. Man, hard to believe that. um, and so, we do have nearly $100,000 emailing list. So, you judiciously use that emailing list. You're good about using social media. We did, like, right before the Kickstarter, I also hire on a new marketing and community director because we knew that this was just going to be bigger than, it was already swallowing all our lives. I actually took a few days off this last week after Adepticon because I had been doing 12 and 14-hour days for like 3 months. And so just had to, get, get a little breathing room, though it's funny because half the time that I just sat and read a BattleTech book or played a BattleTech computer game, but it's kind of in my blood. So
it's
to
all
me,
you've done pretty much for most of your professional lives.
like, it's what I love. So,
What a great story. So, you are having professionals on the team doing this, and you are being very methodical in how you're building this community and setting it up and with them. Another thing, what I'm hearing is you're saying we've trained people to know to come to our store on a certain day and they'll know there'll be something for them. So it feels like you're creating this biorhythm, this cadence of how you bring things out, and you're training people to know when things are coming,
yeah,
which
that
is very interesting.
well, and I mean that in the best way, right? Like it can come across a little bit like, oh, you're getting, some Pavlov training in there or something, but it's more about an expectation. I'm a fan of something, kind of getting that rhythm and, oh, hey, it's time to check in to see if something cool and new. That's a good thing, right? That's what I, as a fan of anything, would want. I don't want to be no. Every once in a while, I want to be surprised, right? Like it's fun to be surprised, but most of the time, I want to know, oh, this cool thing's coming. Um, how long have we all been waiting for Skyrim 6 to be announced, right? Like years and years and years, and they still have not announced it yet. So instead, getting these nice little bite-sized chunks, so they're always aware, hey, I go to the store, I come up on Friday, there's likely going to be something there. That's a really powerful way to not only create that rhythm in your community, but also then have the community trust you that this is what you're doing, right? You're giving them something cool and they're here to support you.
And between the very first Kickstarter that you did and now this mega success, what are the top three things that you learned?
Well, one is that if you have a good story and you make a good game, there's an excellent chance that it's going to be a success. Not always, as I talked about, there's plenty of wonderful writers that their books never take off. There's plenty of wonderful games that can't get past the noise. But unless you get the good game out, unless you make the good thing, you're never going to get it anyways, right? So make sure you're getting the good thing out the door to begin with. The second one is, as massive as all of this was, the material within the Kickstarter, we kind of inverted what we were doing. So last time we did almost no marketing. We had almost no pre-thing at all. In like a month before, we told everyone, hey, this Kickstarter is coming. And it's kind of miraculous that it worked as well as it did, right? Like I said, I think it was serendipity, both of our new box sets, but also that Harebrained Schemes BattleTech computer game was doing so well. So we were able to contact them and go, hey, can you help push, awareness? But then one of the things we learned is, and this is a fun thing to say, because normally when I say it to anyone who's actually fulfilled a Kickstarter, it breaks their brain a little bit. We shipped 752 unique SKUs as part of the last Clan Invasion Kickstarter. Utter insanity. We actually broke BackerKit. Their system, we broke it twice, forcing them to actually go in and recode some of it to be able to do it. So the second big thing we learned was cut way, 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 way back on what you're offering. Now, if you go in and dig in there, this is still a very big campaign, right? There's not a lot that do it at this scale, but it's still much smaller. And so instead of concentrating so much on here's a million pieces that you can get, it was much more on the other side of awareness, of making people excited, the marketing side. Um, and then the third one, again, was just knowing we needed more people on the team to make it happen. We thought we were prepared for the monster, but even we are utterly stunned by how amazing our community is. And just, we're almost ready to hit $5 million. It's just
Yeah,
insane.
incredible. It almost feels weird to ask this given the enormous success you're having and you're celebrating right now, but this is the 40th year of BattleTech,
Yeah.
right? We're
Uh,
celebrating.
Next year is the 40th.
Next, what's next for this franchise? What's in your mind? What can you share about the upcoming 40 years?
So we have lots of plans because we always have awesome plans. We will be doing many cool things as a 40th anniversary. I think our biggest, more minis, of course, because that's what's been powering all of this. More cool stories, more fiction. But really, our biggest goal now is going back to the greatest universe sci-fi universe you've never heard of, right? We want to change that. In 3 to 5 years, we hope it's, oh yeah, I've heard of that, right? For most people. Um, and that's about trying to get into other different new markets. And so that's kind of our focus now of how can we expand this? How can we get this in front of people that have never heard about it, but the moment they see it are going to be like, oh, that looks like something I could get into. And so that's kind of our focus. And unfortunately, I can't really talk about much about what some of that is. Hopefully over the next few months, everyone's going to, if they listen to this, they're paying attention, be like, oh, that's what he was talking about. That's cool. But that's kind of our goal, right? Like flip that. And so while it's fun to be the biggest cult game on the planet, I would, like it if everyone knew what BattleTech was.
Well, it seems like you're on the right track with these mega campaigns. So, Randall, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll link in the show notes, obviously, to your campaign. This will come out while the campaign is still live. So by the time that you're listening to this, you might become backer 30,001.
And anyone that was listening that, listened to me talk on for 50 minutes, I appreciate it. And, give it a try. I think you'll find something in BattleTech there is for you.
I mean, for me, even as like someone who's not a huge gamer, it does look super attractive. And it kind of it looks approachable, and I think it's because what you said earlier, it's like the machines, you can sense how they feel and you can sense how big they are, and there's a realism to the game, I think, that is super attractive and less sort of fantasy like
Yep.
than maybe many other things. With Star Wars, it's clearly, you know you can't really imagine what it feels like to be
Yeah.
on a ship in Star Wars. But with these mechs, these robots, you can kind of feel what that would feel like. And I think that's an amazing feat of this universe. So I'm definitely going to be one of those people who is new to this, but definitely going to be checking it out. And I think many will join me.
I love hearing that. If there's one thing that I like more than working on the game is sharing that new love of something with somebody new. So hopefully you dive in and love it.
Randall, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. Glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Crowdfunding Academy podcast. To get in touch with me or join the creator Discord, please follow the links in the show notes.